Rolling?
You're live on the YouTube.
What is going on, guys? Today we are back with another video. We've kind of been lacking on the videos lately, but we're kind of getting ready for the big sprint of fishing season if you're a fishing YouTuber, which is fishing opener right in my backyard here. We've been fishing kind of all over Mississippi River, Green Bay, and Lake Superior, kind of anywhere we can get a boat in the water and target fish. But opening weekend of walleye season here in northern Wisconsin is just a couple of days away now, probably a day away if you're watching this video. And the sprint is about to start. That's when we're up till 4 a.m. editing and fishing all day long. So very exciting stuff. Get ready for a ton of content. But kind of wanted to do a quick little video here for all you guys getting ready for opening fishing season. And if you're a Minnesota guy, you're a week away now, so it's all kind of relevant. But we're going to kind of go into basically the opening fishing weekend approach, your plan of attack. What are you going to be doing? What are you going to be throwing? What are you going to be targeting? Things of that nature. So, yeah, let's talk about it here for a second. So where should we start, Mitchell? Should we start with like locations? Probably locations lead into bait. It's kind of the logical approach, right?
I'd say, yeah. Tell me a location. Where am I going first, buddy?
So location-wise, kind of going to vary depending on what lake you're on, but spring is generally a shallow water time of year to fish, and especially if you're in a warming trend. And this weekend we have a massive warming trend coming. It's going to be like 77 degrees even in northern Wisconsin on Saturday. Anytime shallow water fish are very fickle as far as if you try to boil a pot of water that has this much water in it, it boils very quickly. If you try to boil a pot of water that has this much water in it, it boils very slowly. Shallow water warms and cools and changes much faster than the deeper water. So anytime you have a warming trend, it's very inviting to invite lots of fish up shallow. And that's exactly what we want. Spring is ultimately dominated by a lot of shallow water bites. Anytime you have a warming trend, the water progressively warming up, you have fish moving towards shallow water, number one, and those fish that are in shallow water are much more bitey. They're much more active. They're in a much better mood. So it's ultimately going to be dominated by a lot of shallow water fishing, which spring kind of always is. But if I'm on a clear body of water system, a large northern Wisconsin type of lake, and a natural type of lake, I'm looking for really big flats. And generally what I mean by that is either a really big point that has a lot of water, less than 12 feet, or a very big flat that comes off of a shoreline, very slow tapering, very long, very big. And shoreline bites are ultimately is kind of the number one thing this time of year. Don't focus too much on that hump that tops out at 3 feet that's surrounded by 50 feet of water. These big, long, slow tapering shorelines are generally going to be the best spot. They just have a lot higher carrying capacity. A lot of these walleyes are shoreline spawning fish in a lot of these type of lakes. And it doesn't really matter what it is, if it's weeds or if it's sand or if it's rock, there's going to be fish in those areas. A lot of times what you're looking for is screenshots that might look something like this here, or something like this here. A lot of these fish position maybe on a weed edge, maybe on the outside of a rock line, maybe up on plain sand. And a lot of the water temps you're probably going to be expecting up here in northern Wisconsin if you are fishing this area are going to be in that 45 to they'll probably warm up to like 50-ish, low 50-ish stuff. So you're probably going to be fishing mostly a post-spawn bite, but these fish are going to be very close to where they're spawning, a lot of these big shallow water flats and things of that nature. If I'm on like a flowage or reservoir type system, I'm also going to be looking very shallow. I'm going to be looking at a lot of main lake points that are very big and very flat that come out into the channel area. And in that scenario, I'm going to be looking for a lot of water that's like 8 feet and less. And I'm going to be looking for, a lot of times in your flowage and reservoirs, you're talking about a lot of stuff called milfoil, which is one of the weeds that normally makes it up shallow throughout the winter. It's a very thick weed, and a lot of times it'll be about that tall this time of year. Walleyes love gravitating towards that stuff because it holds a lot of heat. Or I'm going to be looking for rocks, any kind of slow tapering rock shoreline. A lot of these fish, like I said, they'll be spawning. There might be a few spawners left, but mostly post-spawn, but they're going to be very close to that hard bottom area in which they were or are still spawning in. And or if I'm fishing reservoirs, the other thing I'm looking for is a lot of wood up shallow. A lot of times with the lack of weeds early in the year, you're looking for a lot of these big points or flats that have a lot of timber in them, a lot of stumps, a lot of logs in the water, just a lot of junk going on, because that's a lot of times the only cover you're going to see this early in the year. What are we using for baits this time of year, Mitchell? You could probably guess the number one bait you're going to use this time of year, right? Jig and minnow. Test of time has proven that the jig and the minnow.
What size jig?
Is a killer way to fish. Well, the size of the jig for the most part is probably going to be pretty similar. And I'm trying to find where I got them at in here even. They might be in my other box, I think is probably where I got the most of them. But 1/8 ounce is kind of killer. You know, you can fish a lot of different weights of jigs in less than 10 feet of water, but a lot of times when you have cold water, one of the things to do is to focus on having a slower fall rate. A slower fall rate often catches more fish when the water is cold. One jig I'm very excited about, especially for a lot of my Clearwater applications. This is a hammered Google-Eye jig right here, and we've been using the Google-Eye jig for a while. They got a little rattle in them. But that 1/8 ounce, you know, if you're fishing too heavy a jig way up shallow, what's going to happen is you're going to end up dragging it more. What you really want to happen, especially when you got water like sub 50 degrees, sub 45 degrees, you want that jig to hang up a lot. So you're going to pitch it out there and slowly work that jig back. It's going to have a lot of hang time. It's going to be a lot more wispy when you pop it up. Tip that with a minnow and you can pretty much catch a walleye on it anywhere you're going to go this weekend.
Every cast?
Every cast, well, if you get around the right pot of fish, Mitchell, you can catch a fish on every cast. But you know, these fish in a warming trend like this, they're absolutely going to eat plastics as well. And there's a couple of presentations which are always my go-tos. And this time of year, one that we're going to be fishing a lot. Generally when I fish a plastic, I go to a little bit heavier jig size. This is a 1/4 ounce Pendu jig right here. And I love gold. Got a little rotating head. Very cool little jig I'm excited about. It has a lot of action when you fish this jig, which is something cool about it. And whenever the water is very cold, one bait in which I'm going to fish a lot of is, we'll see if I can dig one up here. Well, there's a couple of them. One's going to be an Arkansas shad 3.8 inch tickle tail swim bait. It's going to have a great action on the fall. That tail really slows the jig fall down a lot. I'm going to cast this up shallow and I'm going to pop it. Kind of a short hop to keep that thing close to bottom, just let that tail work its way down. But I will say this, my absolute favorite one, and if I didn't have such a disaster going on in this boat, I could probably find it much quicker, but is that one right there, the Jerk Minnow Jr., neither a green shiner or an Arkansas shad. Absolutely phenomenal bait to really pitch anytime you're pitching a jig in a plastic right there. And a lot of times these baits excel in cold water because they have very minimal movement. It's the closest thing I've found to fishing a jig in a minnow, but on a plastic. And a lot of times this time of year, you might have a guy in the front of the boat throwing a jig and a minnow, just raking fish, and you know, he'll catch a lot of fish and a lot of, you know, mixed sizes of fish. A lot of times the guy in the back of the boat throws a plastic on and he might get half the bites, but they might be bigger fish as well. Plastics just kind of naturally have a knack at catching bigger fish. So those are definitely a few of the standbys that we're going to be throwing this weekend for sure. And kind of on the other side of the equation, one thing we have not talked about a lot so far this year, but definitely an absolutely killer way to fish. And I'm trying to find the right box here, Mitchell. It's kind of complicated sometimes when you got this much random stuff in your boat. But especially in a lot of if you're fishing a Clearwater lake and you're fishing late in the day or throughout the night, I mean, we'll definitely be out there at midnight catching fish. Any of your suspending crankbaits, the old H-Day 12 right here, suspending Rapala Husky Jerk at a number 12. We're going to throw this around up on a lot of these rock flats and sand flats late in the day or at night. We're going to crank them down to the hip bottom, and we're just going to kind of slowly pull and pop these things through a lot of that stuff. Absolutely killer way to get a jump start on a lot of the competition. When everybody gets there at sunup, you might have already been catching walleyes for 6 hours. So, or troll them too. We'll definitely be doing some trolling. You can get out there at midnight, get on a lot of these really big sand or rock flats and trying to troll throughout the night and catch a lot of fish. Now, if you're going to do some casting throughout the day, a lot of times these fish will just slide out just a little bit. And if you're gonna, you know, a lot of times your best crankbait bites might happen if you have some wind or if you're fishing a stained reservoir type system. Couple of the best baits for working a little bit deeper, kind of like one of these shadow wraps right here in one of the deeper diving varieties. You can easily work this bait down 6-7 feet and work some of that deeper stuff, or just throw the shad wrap too, right? Long wispy rod, making long casts across a lot of these rock and gravel flats, points, humps, kind of whatever you have close to shore. A lot of these big shallow water areas, getting it down at the bottom and working it through the area. So that's just a couple of the ways we're going to be targeting fish this open fishing season weekend, right, Mitchell?
We're not active.
Yeah, so spring is just notorious for having very finicky up and down bites, and the reason for that is that these fish are generally in shallow water like we talked about, and these temperatures can really fluctuate a lot. So obviously warming trends very good for everything in the spring, cooling trends poor for everything in the spring. But a lot of times, and it kind of depends on the lake, if you have a lake that's predominantly a very shallow water bite, like a very shallow lake, like a flowage system, or a lake that's max depth is 20 feet deep, this is generally going to be some of the more challenging areas to fish. If you have a lake, you know, that has a lot of 60, plus foot basin, really 30 plus foot basin, a lot of these fish will stay in the same spot Once it gets cold, they'll just become more challenging to catch. So a lot of times the key then is going to a very light presentation, 1/8 ounce, 1/16 ounce. Spend a lot of time working live bait through that area. Now, if you're on an area like a shallow water flowage system and you're faced with one of these massive cold fronts this time of year, generally what you do is, like, if you were catching those fish, like let's say we were catching these fish right up here on some of these down trees, which is generally a good pattern to fish on a lot of these stained flowage systems. Well, the next thing you do, big cold front happens. Generally what happens is those fish slide out of that stuff, and the next thing you're going to look for is a secondary piece of structure, like a deep stump line or the first cluster of cribs, or something in that 8 to 12 foot zone per se. And same thing, work a very slow moving live bait presentation through those fish. So that's kind of our predictions for opening weekend. Generally in this early season time frame, you always get one of those massive cold fronts that kind of shuts fish down for a while. It's just the reality when you get a 70-degree day in May that it's only going to be followed by snow. But this is kind of where I see the spring going. You guys are going to see a ton of content from us doing a little bit of everything on a whole bunch of different lakes this year. So very excited about that. And hopefully you guys have some success this weekend, catch some fish. Hopefully we have some success as well, Mitchell. You think we'll catch a walleye?
I sure hope so.
Mitchell might just be so good this weekend that Mitch might even catch one.
I might even catch my first one.
I appreciate you guys watching. If you're not yet, please subscribe to this channel. I do appreciate you guys buying all the shirts and everything like that. If you want to get some, I'll throw the link down below. But it does mean a lot that you guys support me doing what I do out here every day. So thank you guys. And yeah, stay tuned for more content. We'll see you next time. And next time you see us, we'll be smashing some walleyes in northern Wisconsin.